Welcome to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, episode 23. I am your host, Stephanie Corey, filling in for the late Richard Behrens, author of the Lizzie Borden Girl Detective series of mysteries. In this episode, we are pleased to interview award-winning filmmaker and professor of media studies and screenwriting, Ricardo Rebelo. Rick directed the PBS documentary Lizbeth, a Victorian Nightmare, and grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, 1 block away from the Lizzie Borden house. He offers us his unique perspective on the case and the people involved in telling the story of the crimes. The Lizzie Borden Podcast is the only podcast entirely devoted to the study of the Borden murders of 1892, Lizzie Borden, and sometimes the history of her hometown, Fall River, Massachusetts. Produced by Nine Muses Books and Anna Behrens. Each episode explores some aspect of the mystery that is Lizzie Borden. From the origins of the doggerel, Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, to a primer on the case by noted authors and experts, including dramatic readings of the Lizzie Borden Girl Detective Mystery Series. And now, the Lizzie Borden Podcast presents an interview with Rick Rebelo. Ricardo Rebelo is the writer and director of the award-winning PBS documentary Lizbeth, a Victorian Nightmare, along with many other films and documentaries. He is a professor of media studies at Bristol Community College and a professor of screenwriting at the University of Rhode Island. Rick was the director of the Rhode Island International Film Festival for a decade and the Rock and Shock Film Festival for another decade. He is also a veteran of the Iraq War. Rick grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, 1 block away from the Lizzie Borden house. Welcome, Mr. Rebelo. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
I can call you Rick.
Yes, you can. Absolutely.
So tell us a little about how you became interested in the Lizzie Borden case. Was it the connection to you being born and raised in Fall River or some other connection?
I was actually born in the Azores, in St. Michael Island, and I came to the United States in 1977. And the first house my parents bought was on 3rd Street in Fall River, which is, 1 street over from the Borden house. So from the moment I started learning about the United States and America and growing up here, I learned about Lizzie Borden simultaneously because it was just in the ether. Certainly, playing with all the kids in the neighborhood, there was always discussion about Lizzie Borden's house and don't go there and the poem and all the other sort of legends and lore that kind of went with Lizzie. So it's a name that's been around me for as long as I could possibly remember. So eventually, as I got older and learned more about it, I wanted to do something, connected with it. And then when I went to grad school, I had the opportunity to do a documentary for my graduate thesis, and that chose Lizzie Borden.
That's interesting. So I have found that many in the city of Fall River would rather forget the crimes and then try to use it to attract tourist dollars, like, for instance, Salem and their witches. So why do you suppose that is? I haven't been able to figure it out, except that it was that way back then, and it seems to still be that way now, but this is 130 years later, so it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. And for some reason, I guess the powers that be, felt that it was a stigma and one they didn't want, which is ironic because they'd love to talk about the mills and they don't talk about the fact that so many children died, getting crushed in those machines. And even when you go to like the mill, the Fall River, the mill museum, there's pictures of kids in front of spindles that eventually got chewed up by those spindles. But nobody seems to have a problem with that. But I guess Lizzie was just a bridge too far for whatever reason.
Well, I always say, but she was acquitted, so it's not like you're glorifying a murderer.
Yeah, it's perception, and it's strange. I still find it strange because, especially there's so much lore. New England is a state filled with lore.
Yeah.
And if you could have a piece of that lore, why not discuss it? Why not share it and be open about it? And the city's gone back and forth on it over the years. I'll never forget when there used to be, a sign on the highway as you're going over the Braga Bridge that would say, Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast, no, Lizzie Borden's house, Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast, exit, blah, blah, blah. And I remember when they took that sign down because, Leanne contacted me and said, I can't believe they took the sign down. Why would they do that? And that's what I mean by say, the city's gone back and forth and back and forth.
When
I
you
don't know
say the
why.
city, though,
Yeah,
it's really the chamber.
it is the chamber, and you and I have talked about the chamber in the past, and they haven't exactly made the best decisions over the last 200 years. Yesterday I was in Exeter, New Hampshire, because I went to go to the bookstore where Stephen King's son autographs books, signs books. And Exeter, and I said to my wife, I said, "Oh my God, look at how storybook this place looks. It looks like something out of a Thomas Kincaid painting." You know what I mean? And I said, you realize that Fall River was as beautiful as this, if not better, because it was the richest town at the time of industrialization. And she's like, well, what happened? And I said, well, what ended up happening is, the people in charge of the purse strings kept knocking down old buildings because somebody gave them, 25 cents because they wanted to put up something ridiculous. And little by little, all of downtown got eaten up and changed into these weird 70s brutalism monstrosities. And now it has no character at all. And I guess Lizzie is probably the biggest victim of that, because one of the things I realized, in making the documentary is a big part of the attraction to Lizzie is not necessarily murder or true crime, but it is that fascination of the Victorian Georgian period. And, Fall River is just about completely expunged itself of that as
Right.
far as the way it looks and feels. So it's funny, years ago, invoking Leanne Wilbur once again, she always joked that she wished she could pick the house up and take it to Salem
Yeah.
because at least Salem they kept that Yankee look, you know what I mean? And nobody would even think to question it because when they think of Lizzie Borden, they think of a very specific aesthetic. We talk about Anna's husband and the little girl Lizzie Borden books. A big part of that is because of that aesthetic. That aesthetic is a big reason why it's such an abundant sort of place to work in as far as being creative goes, as far as coming up with stories and ideas. People love that period. And the city just has desperately tried to walk away from that look. And a lot of it just has to do with literally stealing from Peter to pay Paul because somebody needs to make money and somebody comes up to them and says, well, let me knock down this 200-year-old building so I could put up, a Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, some fly by night thing. And the city just goes, yeah, sure, why not? Yes.
Another Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, yeah.
Not the only Dunkin' Donuts, but
right. The fifth or sixth or
the
eighth,
18th Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah.
And the city just goes, fine. Whereas, years ago, I was the director of ORC TV in Marion and Rochester, Mattapoisett, Massachusetts. And that area, that Tri-City area, Marion, Mattapoisett, Rochester, they will not let a single business open up unless it has a classic Yankee look to it. Like they will not let you, unless it looks colonial, they won't let your building go up.
And sounds like Concord, yeah.
Yeah, when I was there, Dunkin' Donuts was trying to come in, and the big argument they had with Dunkin' Donuts was you could have a Dunkin' Donuts here, but it's got to look like it was made by Ethan Allen, but that's why people go to those towns, and that's why people vacation in those towns, and that's why people visit those towns. That's why whenever they do a Lizzie Borden movie, they can't shoot in Fall River.
Nope, there's nothing to be seen here that looks
Right.
anything like Victorian. They have to go to Lunenburg,
right,
Nova Scotia,
where
the town is laid out like a Victorian times town.
Yep.
They just put dirt on the roads and film. They don't have to change any of the architecture.
Yeah. And even, recently Stephen King had an adaptation of his short story Jerusalem's Lot. They went and shot it in that part of Nova Scotia as well. and it has a beautiful Victorian
Yeah, I've been there.
colonial look. You
I've
know,
been there.
it's great. Like I said, we kind of gave that away for a song down here, which is sad. Because like I said, yesterday when I was up in New Hampshire, I said to my wife, I said, "Oh, I'd love to live in a town that looked like this." I said, I live in a town that looked like this.
Well,
Uh,
how about just living in a town that values history
yeah,
and takes care of it?
right,
Because the whole argument I keep hearing is it's cheaper to tear it down.
right.
And I say, no, it's not.
Well, it's always the nearsighted argument. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but there was a time when the city had hired somebody from National Geographic to come in and do a survey on tourism and how do we get tourists in the town. And so they had this big presentation at the college. So they showed a picture of a building, a very colonial looking building. And they said, "How old do you think this building is?" And people were like, "Oh, it's 100 years old, 50 years old, 75 years old." And the guy's like, "It's 3 years old." And then he showed another building and he goes, "How old do you think this is?" And he goes, "They're not even done building it." They said, and he goes, "People come to New England because they want to come to New England."
Hmm.
Okay. And people have a very specific look in their mind as to what that is. And Lizzie Borden is a great example of that because when they think of Lizzie Borden, it's a very specific aesthetic that they're looking for. So they go there and they don't get that. Like I've always felt bad for people who went to the house and they go to the house and the owner, Leanne, and I don't know how it is now, but always did a great job of keeping that colonial aesthetic.
Hmm.
But the moment you step onto the street, it's gone.
Right.
So, people think when they go to the Borden house that they get to go to this town where, you know what I mean, it's going to have this great colonial feel. And then they get here and it's like, ugh, what do you do? Where do you
Right.
go?
Right. It's
Um,
almost as if the National Park Service has to take it over because at least they would maintain it like they do
yep,
with the Martin Luther King home birthplace in Atlanta, where the entire neighborhood has been preserved.
right,
So you walk back in time when you go there. It's a walking tour, and Fall River's tiny. You could walk all over the place and get
right.
to all the locations or take a quick trolley, but none of it is available to tourism or to residents. And then it sparks this sort of disregard for history because the
Mhm,
city itself doesn't have a history that it embraces.
mhm,
I mean, even if it embraced the mill history, even if
mhm.
it embraced what you're talking about and put its city hall in a mill, that would be reasonable. That would be cool. That would tell a story.
City Hall is the gold-plated example of what happened because once again in the 1970s, somebody convinced somebody that if he gave them enough money, they would build this. When I say brutalism, for those of you who don't know, it's a very specific type of architecture, which is ugly. I mean, hence the name brutalism. So they built this giant brutalistic, the old city hall. Okay, the city hall that was built during colonial times in Fall River was so strong because it was made out of pure granite, right? It took them forever to knock it down. Now you would think that it may be a hint to somebody that maybe we should knock this thing down. But the bullheadedness was nope, nope, we got to build this. The Fall River City Hall, if you could look it up, it looks like Mike Brady designed it from the Brady Bunch. It is so 70s that
But
it is
it's modeled after the exact one in Boston, which is
mm,
considered the ugliest city hall in America.
correct. Yeah, yeah,
It's the same architecture.
yeah, yeah.
Ugh.
And say the UMass Dartmouth, and it was a
Oh,
fever that
yes, yes.
happened.
Yeah.
There was like a fever in the late 60s, early 70s. My college is another victim of that. Actually, BCC is probably suffered it's still brutalistic, but it doesn't look nearly as bad as those other buildings.
Well, it's spread out, so it's a
Yeah,
campus as opposed to
a singular. But getting back to Lizzie though, I mean, but Lizzie is the antithesis of that. Because when you think of if you go beyond the story of Lizzie Borden and just look at the aesthetic of Lizzie Borden, it's lace, it's frailty, it's beauty, it's color. You know what I mean? It's porcelain cups and all these things that people are attracted to, lace gloves and beautiful gowns. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it is so not that. And I can't stress enough that I really feel that I think every year on August 4th, it means so much to people just to get into those clothes and go to the house and cosplay as a woman or man of that time. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think it's a huge part of the attraction.
Yeah.
And you throw in a little bit of murder and a little bit of mystery and it just becomes this cocktail of what people enjoy.
Right. Exactly. And it is a mystery, an
Mhm.
unsolved mystery. So
Correct.
it can attract people at any level and
Mhm.
at any age.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be about the blood and gore. It can just be about who done it.
Mhm.
Because it's who knows. It's like a Sherlock Holmes story,
Yeah.
really. It needs a Sherlock Holmes to solve it. Unfortunately, we don't have
Mhm.
that. Your
Oh, it's too late. Yeah.
your documentary is called Lizbeth, the Victorian Nightmare.
Mhm.
Now, I was a part of that, so you
Mhm.
interviewed me, so I'll have to admit to that and
Yeah.
or confess to that or put that out there so people know that I'm promoting something I'm also in.
Correct.
But I know it was a long process for you. I know it was a really long process for you. I've talked to documentarians before on this case, and I've interviewed them, and I've gotten to understand a little bit about how they work in general. But what was your process about putting together a story in video format and the way you came around doing it? I know that's a huge question, but
Mhm.
I want to know if it's similar to what I understand is more commonly done in documentary filmmaking.
So what I did before I even started interviewing, I wanted to not have a specific thesis in mind. What I wanted to do first was collate groups of people that I could interview and talk to, and then just go out and interview as many people as I could. And then once that process was done, rewatching and rewatching and rewatching everything with a bunch of different notebooks and marking where common threads were. Okay. So everybody's going to tell the story of what happened that day. So I get everybody on the record telling that story. And then I just let them sort of explore what attracted them to the story. And everybody, different people went in different directions or wanted to talk about a certain thing or whatever was most germane to them. So then creating different segments within the documentary that covered different specific time topics. So one thing was obviously the story. So first you got to go right off the gate with the story. Then what attracted you to this? One of the big things for me is I was a student of Professor Jules Reichelbusch, who's also in the documentary, and Jules for a long time was like one of the foremost Lizzie Borden experts, and he
He
had
was the editor of the Lizzie Borden Quarterly
yes he
for 10
was.
years or 8 years or whatever.
He was my dean in communications at BCC. I took classes with his wife, his late wife, Margaret, as well. I got a lot of Lizzie Borden education in
Yeah,
my
I bet.
undergrad.
I bet.
So I knew that Jules was really good at telling the narrative story because Jules is a really good storyteller. He's just intuitively that way. So I knew that he was going to play a big part of that narrative part. And you were also a good storyteller, so I knew you would play a very integral role in that part. So that's why, and I've actually explained this to my students as we've gone through documentary filmmaking in class. I said, you got to find someone who could tell the story very well. I said, there's some people who know the story and can say the important bits, but they don't come across as being able to tell a story well. So you have to find people that bridge that gap, where they have the information, but they can also communicate it well. So as I'm going through the interviews, that's some of the things I'm looking for. Who could tell this story well and accurate enough that I'm not going to get rocks thrown at me in the street by other Lizzie aficionados. And then, who can tell the threads very well. there's some people that were expert at the look and style of Lizzie Borden
Yes.
because that's their thing. That's their gimmick. That's what they love. So let them talk about that. You know what I mean? When you're talking to an actor or an actress that plays Lizzie Borden, let them talk about what it's like to try to put themselves in her shoes. Let them talk about that. I did one segment on I was very fortunate that there was a huge art exhibit in New Bedford that just covered Lizzie Borden art, which is great because you get to see the art part. We get to see her through that lens of pop culture.
Gallery X, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
Gallery X, and it allowed me to see who is Lizzie Borden through the eyes of artists, through different people interpreting who she is. What is her place in the world? And like I said, in pop culture, because she's a pop culture icon, because I think that Lizzie's also played a big role as far as depicting teen angst in the last 100+ years,
Yeah.
because she defines, that anger that we all feel towards our parents as adolescents. You know what I mean?
Even though she was 32, you still think that.
Because that's the thing, is that gets lost. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where you have the facts and then you have public perception.
Oh, okay.
And yes, the factual, physical, living Lizzie Borden was almost middle-aged when this thing happened. But the perception of the pop culture is that she was a young woman.
Okay.
Whenever you see her depicted, especially by artists, she always looks like a teenager.
They always called her a girl.
Right.
The girls. They
Yeah.
called both of them the girls. And
Right.
Emma was like 40.
Right.
And she was
Yeah.
still called the girls.
Right. I mean, they were closer to being, spinsters or crones than they were girls. You know what I mean? As far as their
Right.
age goes.
Right.
But the pop cult, the way that society perceives Lizzie Borden is a young, angry, angsty teenage girl whose dad is giving her a hard time because she wants to go out and party, and she's had enough. And that's something that I think makes the story sort of internal and transcendent,
Oh, I see.
because it's something that I think that people, and especially women, catch on to, because they know what it's like to be young and feel like their parents are keeping them from being the best they can be. You know what I mean? Have the
Yeah.
most fun they could have, that concept of being under daddy's thumb, and kind of breaking out. I think that's a huge part of what attracts people to the story.
So you
Even
talked to
though,
people who talked about that too, then.
yeah, I did. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about, you have a heavy metal band named Lizzie Borden,
Right.
right? So the philosophy behind that's not going to be, no heavy metal band's going out to say, we really identify with middle-aged women who are having a real estate dispute with their parents. You know what I mean? No, it's about angst, and it's about violence, and it's about that type of stuff. But the beauty of the documentary is different people interpret it in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You have people that see her as the teen angst person, but then you have the people who, like you, who love the fascination of a mystery and a crime, and you really want to get granular and down to the nitty-gritty of specifics. And that's another reason I think why it works, because it has a little bit for everybody, I feel.
Were you able to interview Mrs. Brigham from the Historical Society? I don't remember.
No, I did not. No,
Well, the fact that you interviewed Jules is a big deal, because
Mhm.
he's retired now and
Yeah.
not interviewing anymore. And
Right.
so there's a historical level to capturing people in
Yeah.
a moment of time like you did.
My friend Ken Souza, who is also a professor of mine, he did a documentary called Lizzie Borden, A Century of Fascination. He passed away about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And obviously Leanne is already no longer with us, and she passed away. So for me, it's getting kind of heartfelt if I watch the documentary now, that a lot of people I love that are in that are no longer with us. So,
Well, believe it or not, she's also a great matchmaker, because she brought us all together. So
and that
there's
was
a good
really her
thing
power.
about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I would never have met Anna
Mhm.
except through Richard and Lizzie Borden. I would never met my boyfriend except through Lizzie Borden. I would
Mhm.
never have met you.
Mhm.
It's like all of my really serious friends
Mhm.
are somehow connected to Lizzie Borden.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It
It's
is. The curse of not being able to make money from her is real, but she is a social worker in terms of bringing people together,
absolutely, yeah,
people that are real,
yeah.
you know.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Like when I went into doing the documentary, I remember when I first approached Leanne about shooting at the house. I said, "Listen, I have no interest in making money on this. That's not my
Right.
end
It's your
all be all,
thesis, right?
right? You know, and I just want to do it, and I'm glad that I had that attitude going in because I have now I've posted the documentary now for free on YouTube because I just want people to just have it, and experience it. And my ex-wife used to get so mad at me. She used to get so furious. Like, you should be making money. And when I signed, I signed over to PBS that they could show it in perpetuity, as long as they want. And it's great because every now and then I'll get a call from somebody and they'll say, "Hey, I saw your documentary on PBS the other day." And I'm like, "Great." I actually have two documentaries that I signed over to PBS. And it just I'm glad that that wasn't my desire going in, because I think it saved me a lot of anxiety. Uh, it took a lot of pressure off me that I wasn't worried about it. So
Yeah, really. So when I interviewed the producer of Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, which was I think a Discovery Channel documentary, pretty sure, that I did a long time ago. He had this sort of the same idea of how to put the TV show together, where he just said, I interviewed everybody I could find. And it was in the editing room, listening to everybody's stories,
yeah.
that I put together a narrative of the documentary. And that's, I think, why some people end up on the cutting room floor. And that's why some people get more prominent,
Mhm.
because it turns out they're more photogenic, or they have an interesting story to tell,
Mhm.
or it figures in with the rest of the people thematically that you're going for. And it seems smart to do it that way, but it also seems sort of like a shame,
Mhm.
because I wish there was a conceived idea ahead of time so that I would know as a talking head where I fit in, as opposed to me being fit in where the filmmaker thinks it needs to be. But that's just my experience with it. Like when I make documentaries, I do it the opposite. I do it the exact opposite. I have a script. So it's just, I guess, a different style. But Lizzie definitely, because there's so many different people who are interested in the case and so many different people to interview, that's, I guess, the smartest way to do it, which is sort of put everybody in a basket and see.
Well, and as you've experienced, working on Lizzie all these years, Lizzie experts or people in the Lizzie Borden world can be wild cards.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know for sure with any certainty exactly, where things are going to go or what direction they're going to be in.
But that's the case in any historical mystery,
Yeah.
because the same guy who did our documentary did one on Billy the Kid.
Hmm.
And they were talking about digging him up. Is that the one that they were talking about digging up, and to confirm it was really him buried because they didn't know if he really died when he said he died? Yeah, Billy the
Yeah,
Kid.
I think so. Yeah.
He said people came out of the woodwork. Like
Hmm.
there were strange people who thought they were him, who dressed like him, who walked around like him all day long. So that was not just common to Lizzie Borden, that there are some people who are obsessive about it and can be kind of unusually, eccentrically odd
Yeah.
about the case. But apparently that's the case with like anything, like the JFK assassination and, other Custer, there's always some crazy historian. It's
Well,
just like there's
and
non-crazy historians.
the other issue is, when I submitted the documentary in 2010, PBS said very specifically it's got to be 58 minutes 30 seconds. So when you have that type of limitation, when you're 58 minutes and 30 seconds, you have to trim some things out. You know what I mean? And you have to have some sort of flow and some sort of. Now it's only been 12 years, but it's a very different world. Whereas now, if I did it, I would probably release entire sections of interviews and let people watch whatever interview, however long it would be.
Oh, right. Like but not just outtakes, but the entire
The entire
interview.
thing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because that way, kind of like the way bonus features were on DVDs, were like, because I know there's people like you who are like, I want everything you got. Give me everything you got. You know, don't just trim it. I want to get into finding something there.
Well, that's
It's not-
funny. It was there was a documentary that came from Australia, Women Who Kill,
Mhm.
and they said, "Oh, you are going to be our expert on this case, and you are going to be the person that we will guide us through this documentary process, and you'll be on screen all day." And I took a day off of work and they filmed me in my house and they asked me, they had Parallel Lives by the Historical Society in their lap and they had read it. And they asked me interesting questions and they knew the case before they made the documentary. And it was the most amazing experience. And I was with them for something like 14, 16 hours. I was in the documentary, I kid you not, for about 12 seconds
Wow.
because they went a different way.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the history
Mhm.
that they had envisioned in their head. It was about the killing. It was about the murder. It was about that women killing parents. It was about patricide and matricide. So they even had a grand plan that they threw out the window. And it was just like, oh, well, I wasn't even in it, really. Oh,
Right.
okay. Well, I'm done doing that for free.
No, I agree. It's tough, but I think one of those things where some people are, like you said, are focused on the act, and some people are focused on the impact. You know what I mean? Some people just want to know about the crime. Some people want to know about the outcome of the crime. And I know you and I talked about the Jeffrey Dahmer miniseries recently,
Yeah.
and I said the thing that I like the most about it is that we got to see not just how it affected his life, but and not just how it affected the victims' lives, but the families of the victims and his
Yep.
neighbors and things like that. And when I was doing this documentary, I wanted somebody to tell the story at the beginning, but I also wanted to spend a lot of time on cultural impact, society, and everything else.
Right.
And I still feel like there's a lot of different things I could have done. For instance, when you talk about Parallel Lives, Parallel Lives gives you such a gigantic, it's a scope of the city of the time, the people of the time, all these things around Lizzie Borden, this really, zoomed out perspective of everything,
Yep.
uh, which it would be very hard to do as a visual narrative, you know what I mean, to do as a documentary without it being, it'd have to be a 12 part, 2 seasons of 12 parts each.
Yep.
But you'd also have to keep that audience reeled in that entire time, and that is what could be tough to do. There will always be people who want that, but is there enough people who want it to merit the time, effort, and money spent on doing it that way? That's really the problem.
It would
That's
have to be a
series.
docudrama.
Yeah.
Yeah, a docudrama, not a documentary.
Yeah.
They did an interesting thing recently with who was it? Madoff,
Yes.
where there was some acting, but it was minor compared to. So it was an interesting documentary. It was a new kind of a documentary for me. So maybe that's possible with Lizzie. They still do the reenactments part with actors, but that's not what this was about. This was about being able to put Madoff in places where they don't have video of him there. So they have an actor do it, and they know it's an actor, but it's evocative. So they use him documentary style instead of reenactment style. I think it's a brand new kind of combination art form for a documentary, and I'd like to see some of that done with Lizzie Borden instead of the
Traditional, yeah.
the traditional recreation of the crime the way they always do it at the house or someplace else. But it's something that you and I both know a lot about, but then there's a whole lot of people that don't know much about it. So you always have to start with the basics. You always have to start with the story. It's funny because of the jump rope crime, people think that she did it who don't know anything about the case and are surprised to even to find out she was acquitted. So, I mean, there's a lot of hurdles in that direction too. When you filmed it, I remember going into the set that you had created at BCC, and there was this very atmospheric screen behind me with lights and color and sort of a silhouette and curtains. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
But I remember it being very filmic and very interesting. Everyone was different though, right? So you didn't interview people. So how did you decide production value wise what to do?
So at that particular time in my career, I was very influenced by Italian filmmakers like Mario Bava and Dario Argento. That's why my company that at the time I called it was Giallo Films, because Giallo, for those who don't know, Giallo is Italian crime novels, pulp novels from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Giallo just means yellow in Italian. So yellow press books, exploitive in nature. And Bava and Argento were all very colorful, very bright, very vibrant, very saturated. So because that was my influence at the time, and I was also shooting independent horror films at the time. I was working for a company called EI Pop Cinema, and we would make all the horror movies that if you went to Blockbuster or Family Home Video, we would make the whatever extra horror movies you saw on the shelves that weren't Hollywood blockbusters. So that was the style that I was using at the time.
Oh.
And I liked it for Lizzie. I didn't do it. The funny thing is, I didn't do it in the house. When I shot in the house, I went the other way, because when I went to the house, everything was very stark, white, cream, sort of Victorian in nature. A lot of marble countertops and things like that. So I remember it being that very, like I said, light colored. But the interviews I kind of went the other way on, just because, like I said, at the time that was the aesthetic that I had been playing with the most, and I just didn't want to be boring. I just didn't want to.
It comes down to that, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to just have a gray background and the front light, basic stuff. So I wanted people to pop a little bit.
It was elaborate. I remember thinking, "Oh, wow, this is amazing. This is very cool."
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah,
that was fun.
That was another reason why I wanted to do Lizzie, because it let me kind of enjoy, that aspect of what I like to do and mix it with, the stuff I had grown up with. So it worked out well.
Did you discover anything you didn't think you would know, or did you discover something new while you talked to the people while you were interviewing them?
Well, what I discovered was more of a socio thing, just kind of how the people interacted with each other. I never realized that people were that they felt like an ownership to Lizzie Borden, like they felt like they were the expert and they're the one you talk to, and don't talk to this other person, and my way is the right way. And I never thought that people would feel that strongly, because my opinion was, at the end of the day, we don't know. We really don't know what happened at the end of the day.
Right.
So you can have an opinion. That's fine to have an opinion, but no one can really be like, my opinion is set in stone, because nobody's opinion can be set in stone, and I think that's what I learned. And I had to learn a lot about managing expectations, managing different people, because I wasn't out to offend anybody and I wasn't out to pick sides. I didn't want to pick sides,
Right.
and I wanted to try to let people do their thing. And I had to walk a tightrope to do that. The professor who was in charge of my thesis said to me, it's a shame you didn't film yourself doing this, because I'm
Uh,
sure it would have been a whole other worthwhile documentary to see you go through the pains of managing and mitigating all this to create this. And I said,
every
well,
filmmaker thinks that they could make a film about making a film, though.
yeah,
That's, you know, f- that's
yeah,
very common
yeah,
because it's true. The most interesting thing is the making of the film.
yeah.
Herzog does that so
Oh
well.
God, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. My Best Fiend is one of my favorite documentaries.
Yeah.
About him and Kinski.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm I feel blessed that he made that.
I know, really.
Just how just crazy Klaus Kinski was, and I love Herzog. I'm one of those. I constantly show
Every
Herzog
single
to my
one.
students. Yeah,
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 every single one.
and my students are always one of the things that Herzog did was that I teach my media students, the concept of don't avert your eyes. Even when society and culture is ridiculous, it's important to recognize it. You know what I mean? And to look at it. Don't, like Herzog says, don't avert your eyes. And, with the Lizzie thing, I think it was such an education in so many things that I will forever be grateful that I was allowed to make it and sort of be a part of it, and to meet all of you, and to get to work with all of you. And like you said, so many great friendships and relationships came out of that. And it feels, since the house was sold, it does feel like that chapter is closed. you
Right.
know
Who
uh
knows those people, right? Nobody
yeah,
knows them. They're for
it,
out of towners.
right, and because we really had a community, there. uh every, August 4th, I knew who I was going to see when I went to that house.
Right.
And if I went to the Fall River Historical Society, I knew who was going to be there. You know what I mean? I knew all the different people, and it was like it was like homecoming week. Every week you'd come and see everybody and check in and see how everybody's doing, how they're feeling.
Well, I
Uh,
would go to the reenactments every single year,
mhm.
even though it was the same,
Yeah,
just generally
yeah,
every year.
yeah.
But it was to watch the people
Hmm.
react to it because there were people who were there from all over the place.
Yeah,
And it was also to look at how they maybe improve their accents or, sometimes it would be
yeah,
terrible in that they would joke too much
yeah,
about the dead body, or sometimes it would be like, "Oh, that was a really cool idea that you just did there in the cellar."
yeah.
So there would be moments of genius that were pretty much extemporaneous, that just kind of fell out of these people's mouths, that were kind of profound. So
Mhm.
it didn't matter that I had seen it before. It was a whole new experience every time. It's like going to Disney. I mean, you know what you're going to get, but you go again and again and again and again
Mhm.
because it's entertaining
Yeah, yeah. It's
and
always
educational.
it's
Yeah.
always flavored just a little bit
Yeah, a
differently,
little bit differently. Yeah.
and there's always new people coming in and out of that group, that culture. Obviously, that they probably have a whole new culture of people over there now. You know what I mean?
Well, with
I
COVID, they kind of didn't do anything for the
Right.
past couple of years. So who knows what their plans are for the
Yeah.
future as
But
far as August 4th.
I'm sure the owner and whoever's managing the house now is,
Yeah.
they got their friends and their people, and the people that work there, and they're creating a new culture or a different culture. And
Right. Right.
I'm happy. When I first approached the house, it was still owned um by the people who owned Leary Press. And I don't know if I ever told you a story. It's pretty funny. I was doing a series called Dark New England, where I was traveling to haunted attractions all over New England. So of course I was going to call the haunted attraction down the street. Why wouldn't I? So I contacted them, and I talked to a woman. I don't remember the woman's name, which is probably good. That way I don't have to drop it. But she said to me, she goes, I wouldn't want the riffraff who would watch a show like that to come to our house.
Oh,
And
oh,
I'm sitting there going, you have a haunted bed and breakfast, and you wouldn't want the riffraff who would watch a show about a haunted bed and breakfast to come to your house. Well, needless to say, that's probably a reason why she had to sell the house, because if that,
riffraff.
yeah, if that's your attitude, if that's how you feel towards the people who would be interested in coming to your house, then obviously you're not doing a good job attracting
They're
people.
the ones who opened it,
Right.
right? For
Which,
all the riffraff.
and then, when Leanne bought it, it was the complete 180-degree opposite, where she was tremendously inclusive. And I used to give her a hard time because, she would have a lot of these like local Fall River ghost and paranormal shows on there. And a lot of these guys were just, they were not on the up and up. They were
Right.
going in there with, meters that they bought at Harbor Freight Tools, and going around and yelling at walls. And I was like, how do you let these guys in here? Just the way she was. She was just inclusive. She was like, I'll let them come in, I'll give them an hour to run around and do what they want to do. And I'm like, all right, well, I can't complain because she let me in. So
Yeah, but you didn't have any tools from Harbor Freight except maybe.
no, I had some duct tape and stuff like that, to put up mics and lights, but no, that wasn't the foundation of my equipment. Was voltage meters that I bought at Harbor Freight,
Well,
or the
they've lots of famous people came through that house
oh God,
too
yeah, yeah. No, I mean,
in the day.
I think that was definitely a specific time where we caught it at like a beautiful sort of sweet spot,
Right. I like
where
that.
yeah, there was sort of this pop culture interest. There was people were making movies, people doing documentaries. The owner was open and inclusive, and like I said, we lucked out. I think that that period of time, from the early 2000s to up a couple of years ago, was, I think, will be looked back as sort of the golden age of Lizzie Borden as far as visiting and goes and things like that. So
Yeah, one time I called Leanne and I said, I don't know how to ask you this, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask you. Would it be possible for me to spend the night in the house
mhm.
alone on a
Yeah,
day that you don't have any guests?" And she paused a second, and I thought she was going to say, "That'll be $500, you
yeah,
know."
yeah,
She said, "I was wondering when you'd call and ask me that."
yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Like, no problem. When are
Mhm.
you free? I don't have anybody on such and such a date. Come on down. And I was like, okay, I won't sleep in any of the beds. So you don't have to make any of the beds. So I
Mhm.
won't create any work for you.
Mhm.
But I just need to hear the sound of the house without people. Because
Mhm.
every time you go there, either on a tour or with other guests, there's always chatter. There's always
Right.
noise. There's always people. There's always
Mhm.
energy. There's always stuff going on. I just wanted to feel the house.
Yeah.
And of course, feeling the house in, 2023 is not the same as feeling the house in 1893 at
Right.
all.
Right.
The sounds are completely different from the outside in, but
Mhm.
it was just a sense of it's such a rarity that a house like that still exists that I wanted to absorb it
Yeah.
and just experience it.
Well, it gave you a solemn moment, you know what I mean? And
It
just
was. It
some
was.
peace and some solemnity, and you can take it in where, like, as you said, when you're there during the day, there's people walking in and out, there's always plates clanging, people are eating breakfast, people are eating lunch, people are doing stuff,
Or
people are
screaming and
doing
yelling
tours,
because
screaming and
they've
yelling.
seen something or heard something, and you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, please go back to bed."
No, but that was kind of the beauty of the way she was. She was just inclusive that way.
It was so sweet. She was
Yeah.
so sweet.
Yeah, I never did it. I never actually stayed at the house the entire time. Um,
Well, I was
she
there lots of times,
Yeah, she had
mostly
offered to.
paid,
Yeah,
though. We paid to
yeah.
stay there, and I was there in '97. They opened in '96, and I was there in '97, right after they opened, just
Mhm.
a couple of months later.
It was still the Learys that owned it in '97, though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, it
yeah.
wasn't the Learys, it
It
was
was.
the family who owned
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
Press, yeah,
yeah.
and,
Mhm.
yeah, the first time I went there,
Mhm.
and, it's funny because yeah, they sold that house to, Donald Wood and, Leanne, and
Mhm.
that was that, and it became a different place.
Yeah,
Like you said, it really was open. That's a
Oh, it
really good
was.
way to describe it, because it really
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, I mean, as many times I would just go over there, on a lunch break and just walk in and just be like, "How's it going?" You just talk to Leanne and the people around the counter and everything else, and it's eventually they started selling the DVDs there to the documentary before I posted it online, because it was costing her a lot of money to get to sub-license the DVDs from like all the different cable channels. So if she got DVDs from like A&E and stuff like that, it would cost her a ton of money. And I was just letting her sell DVDs, so I didn't care. So I would be dropping off 20, 30 DVDs every now and then and coming in. And she and we both had an incredibly black sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were constantly just sending each other these ridiculously dark jokes and memes all the time. And she knew that I enjoyed the funny side of the Lizzie Borden thing as well. And then we would go to conventions together. I used to take her with me to Rock and Shock, around International. We would go to Terracon, all these different places, and we would have a blast, talking about bad horror movies and things like that. So we're
She
always,
had quite the following too, just
yeah,
she herself.
yeah. Oh God, yeah. Well, because like I said, because she was so inclusive, you right before she died, I had talked to her and I said, I said, because she was worried about, like, if I sell the house, what are people going to think? And you, I said, I could never find another person like you. You're too unique.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't care if you have that house, or I don't care about any of that stuff. How am I going to find, even like you, Steph? I'm like, how am I going to find another Stephanie Corey? You know what I mean? How am I going to find someone else who I connect with on this plane? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you guys are too valuable,
Oh,
because we are, this clique is not a clique for everybody. It's like we're not like everyone. We like the stuff that we like, and
yep, yep.
when you find somebody else that enjoys it. I was reading, Edgar Allan Poe had a poem, and I remember there was a line in it where he said, I'm not from a common spring. I'm not born of the common earth. You know what I mean? It was basically him in the 1800s talking about how he's like us. Like, I don't like all the stuff that regular people like. I like my weird stuff. I like my murder stuff and my scary stuff and my spooky stuff.
Right.
And it's Poe sort of acknowledging that and feeling that he's sort of on the outside because of it. And I think we're all kind of in that same boat. We love this stuff, and it's, sometimes I wonder, like, my wife is very straight laced, and I always wonder, like, what does she think when I'm sitting here just watching true crime documentaries hours at a time?
She's be like, whoa, he's trying to plot the perfect murder. Does he have any life insurance on me? Let's
Yeah.
see.
And my answer is always like, I'm fascinated in what people think and why they do what
And
they
why they
do,
do what they do.
and
Exactly.
Lizzie Borden is such a magnet for people who like that, because the fact that it's an unsolved crime is, 100 and some odd years later, we're still trying to figure out who did what and why did they do what they do. What
Right.
what
And we'll
what
never really
caused this,
know.
right?
So
Because that's always going to be the biggest question, is why.
I have epiphanies and brain enlightenments over
Mhm.
little silly stuff
Yeah.
that I all of a sudden see in a new way, or all of a
Mhm.
sudden see in a new light, or I discover something and I was like, oh, am I the first person to see that? Like, is that, or did everybody know that? And I'm just
Mhm.
figuring it out because I'm dense. I can't figure that out. And
Right.
so I'm afraid to say it out loud because I don't want to sound stupid,
Mhm.
because I just saw something that I've never seen before in the story,
Yep.
in a visual, in a photograph, in a
Mhm.
this. And I'm like, it doesn't explain anything though. It
Yep.
doesn't answer anything. It doesn't get me any closer to the solution. But after staring at those photographs for 20 years or longer, not all day long, of course, I'll see something that I've never seen before,
Right.
because and I'm like, oh wow, that's freaky that that happens, because you have to look at it fresh all the time.
Right. Right.
You can't take any of it for granted. When I discovered that Andrew and Sarah wedding portrait in Swansea at the Luther's Museum, I was there with another Borden person, and I went into this tiny little book room, and I looked, I said, that looks like Andrew. And I said, come over here. Doesn't that look like Andrew? And she said, oh, it kind of does. And then she walked away and did what she wanted to do, which is her interest as a part of the museum.
Right.
And I was like, no, I've never seen this picture before. I've never seen this portrait before. And so I took a picture with my camera and I brought it home. And I was like, I showed it to my boyfriend. I'm like, is that Andrew? And he's like, sure looks like him. Showed it to Michael Martins. He goes, yep, that's him. And I'm like, so here's this girl from Florida who walks into this museum in Swansea and finds stuff that it's just sitting there against the wall and nobody knew what it was, because I'm seeing things with fresh eyes. And I try to keep the fresh eyes going because I don't want to be stuck.
Right.
So when people ask me, do you think she did it? I'm like, I have no idea. And I'm being honest. I have absolutely no idea, and I never will. So you go ahead and have your theory. That's fine with me. But base it on facts.
And I think in the future, what will make it fascinating is because now, people's lives are documented so specifically. I tell my students that when you look at every child born after Facebook will basically have a complete annotated story of their life digitally.
Diary.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the digital diary. Yeah.
And they'll be able to go back to not even when they were born. They can go back and trace their parents' relationship and all the way through to them being born. And then at some point, they're going to have these branching points in their life because their parents are the people who are going to start telling their story. And then eventually they'll start telling their own story, and their parents will be continuing to tell their story on their timelines. And you'll have these different interpretations of what their lives are.
Wow.
And it's going to be cataloged extremely specifically. So even the days where they are angry at their parents, we're going to know, because they'll be on there posting, oh, like my mom and dad today suck. Do you know what I mean? Like we'll get all of the minutia. Whereas with Lizzie Borden, it's like you'll get one picture, and that picture covers 5 years of her life.
Right.
And like, how do I distill what's going on in her head in one photo that covers a huge span of time? You know what I mean? When you look at those pictures of her towards her end of her life at Maplecroft, holding her puppies on the porch over there, you wonder, like, so much wisdom is buried in that head, and there's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much, that there's an amazing story there from, once she's acquitted to when she dies that we don't know about. And that's because, people could be private back then. And I think that's one of the things, in the future. Recently in my social media class, we talked about Gabby Petito, and I talked about how, Gabby Petito is going to be one of the first true crime stories that people are going to be able to pull apart through media that they find on the internet, because Gabby Petito was posting right up until she was murdered, and she was with her murderer. That's why we have the footage of the cops pulling them over and talking to them. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how different would Lizzie Borden be if we had the interviews with the police who went to that house that day? If Bridget Sullivan had a Facebook, you know what I mean? And if we could see what Bridget was posting, you know what I mean? If all of them were posting, you know what I mean? If her uncle was trying to look inconspicuous and posting, I took the train to New Bedford today to, throw us off the trail, you know what I mean? Or everybody would just have pictures of pears, the big bowls of pears they're taking pictures of. So it would be fascinating. And that's the thing, is because we have so little to work with, for 100+ years, people have been trying to fill in those blanks. It's kind of like, one of the things that makes pets and children fascinating is because they can't explain themselves in language that we understand. So we try to interpret what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
And that's what we do with Lizzie Borden. We look at these pictures of this woman, and we're trying to interpret what's going on, behind those eyes. And you look at pictures of her father, and not a lot of happy pictures of Andrew Borden out there. So when you look at Andrew Borden, he looks miserly. He looks like Scrooge. So of course you're going to always interpret negative things about Andrew Borden, but at the end of the day, none of us really know who Andrew Borden was.
Right.
Maybe he loved his daughters. Maybe he just didn't want them going out and being the Paris Hiltons of Fall River. We don't know. And maybe the girls were difficult. Maybe they were being sort of, a pain to deal with. You 6-year-old daughter still living with you in the 1800s. You know what I mean? That would be frowned upon. And it would be, people would probably think that he didn't do a good job of parenting, that she didn't find a husband at that point.
Yeah, well, now this is more common than not with people
Right.
living with their parents. So it's
Yeah.
come full circle.
Yeah, it has. It totally has. But like I said, at that time, though,
Right.
she should have been married. I mean, in her teens, late teens, 18, 19, she should have been raising a family.
That darn Civil War took out a lot of guys.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did.
Yeah, that would have been that era. So,
Yep.
do you ever consider making another Lizzie documentary?
No, I've wanted to do projects in the last 10 years, and my personal life's been up and down, and I've been really busy, and I just haven't been able to. I haven't had the muse. I really wanted to do something about H.P. Lovecraft that I started filming with Dave Mello.
Right.
And I never got to finish that because I wanted to shoot the sonnets. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a book of sonnets called The Fungi from Yuggoth. And I wanted to shoot the individual sonnets. I did one, and I never got around to doing the rest. I wanted to do a documentary about Edgar Allan Poe in Providence. And, he had that whirlwind romance with a writer from Rhode Island, that he came to Providence to try to marry her one summer, and it fell apart, and there's all this crazy stuff. And I wanted to do that, and I haven't done that yet, but I did a lot of prep work on that.
You're writing too, right?
Yeah. I got about halfway through a novel about H.P. Lovecraft working with Lizzie Borden to try to solve a crime that has to do with paranormal stuff. Because the interesting thing, Lovecraft's life and Lizzie Borden's life interacted, or when they were alive at the same time. She died in the late 20s?
1927.
27. And Lovecraft really started his career in earnest in the 1917, 1918, 1920. And Poe had a friend named C.M. Eddy.
You mean Lovecraft?
Oh, Lovecraft. I keep screwing up the two. Lovecraft had a friend named C.M. Eddy who worked with Harry Houdini. And Lovecraft had actually ghostwritten a couple of Houdini's books. And C.M. Eddy had ghostwritten Houdini's other books. In my story, Lovecraft, Houdini, Eddy, and Lizzie Borden get together to try to solve this cult murder in Fall River, which ends up over in Interlaken, or the area where Interlaken is.
Yeah.
That period of time is so fascinating because of it was that height of, they didn't call it paranormal. What did they call it? It was the age of
spiritualism.
Spiritualism, yes, with Madame Blavatsky and a lot of the other things are going on. It's a really fascinating time. Again, I remember at that time as well, you had C.M. Eddy over in England. You had
Aleister
Crowley. They play a role in the book too, Crowley and the other person, because they have people over here in New England trying to do nefarious things and look for artifacts. Because at the time, Crowley had been kicked out of the Order of the Gold, I think it was the Golden Rose, because he was trying to invoke. They had this ritual where they try to invoke demons so that their guardian angel comes to save them. The idea is to invoke your demons and have the angel Michael come in and save you. And then if Michael saves you, then he'll empower you with his powers.
I see.
And that's where Crowley had bought this house in Scotland on the water, which eventually got bought by Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, because he just thought it was cool that Aleister Crowley was trying to invoke all his demons in the house. Yeah, there's so many interesting things there. And then remember, you have Arthur Conan Doyle, who was really good friends with Houdini as well.
Yeah, all around the same era. Yep.
All the same. It's such an amazing era. when you think
Yeah.
about all those different people sort of living, at this time in this
And the
amazing,
suffragettes and the
yeah,
women's rights movement and
yeah,
that's going on at the same time. And
yeah. It,
Queen Victoria is still alive. And
that's why I say this period is, I think, attracts so many people, because it was a time when folklore was still very much part of society and a mainstream thing. And you had all these people coming from these old countries in Europe and Eastern Europe and bringing their religions and bringing their folklore in, and all these different things sort of, mixed. And then you have New England, which had its own, foundation and folklore thrown in on top of all that. It's just fascinating what people would think at the time. So,
wow.
yeah.
Oh, you've blown my head. You've blown my mind. Oh my gosh. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, who do you think committed the Borden murders?
So yeah, like you said, I'm not sold on any one particular thing. I blame either Lizzie or her sister for if you ask me, 6 days out of 7 days, I'll tell you it was probably Lizzie, because that, as you know, because you're a big true crime person, that level of violence is not done by somebody who's there to snatch the family jewels. If someone's there to just get some money, they wouldn't usually commit to that many axe blows in somebody's
Nothing
head.
was stolen either, so
Right.
it wasn't a robbery.
Yeah. So it would have to, there's got to be a personal reason behind it. So if not Lizzie, certainly somebody in their family, I think, had to have done it. It would have to be somebody with a very deep personal grudge for both of them. You know what I mean? Because it's two pretty committed murders.
So that's only 6 days out of 7. So what about the 7th day?
Seventh day, I could go with Bridget Sullivan, or I could go with her uncle. You know what I mean? Once again, her uncle had kind of a flimsy alibi. And
Flimsy? It was rock solid.
it seems flimsy to me because it seems too contrived for me. That
Well, he was like a strange dude,
yeah,
right?
that's why I only think he did it one day out of the week instead of 6 days.
Okay, okay.
So,
Because he could be like this major OCD guy who
yeah,
remembers things like that.
he could have been autistic. We don't know.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And he hung around.
But I'm definitely not a
Show
Billy
up.
Borden guy.
No, no, no. No. Not a Billy Borden girl either.
No, no, I don't buy that at all.
Well,
So
show me a footnote, please, Arnold Brown. Show me a
yeah,
footnote.
give me something to
Give
work
me
with.
something instead
Yeah,
of just
yeah,
this conspiracy. If you start off with a conspiracy theory, nope, I can't
yeah,
wrap my head around it because people talk.
yeah.
There's no such thing.
And like I said, you and I have studied this so much and spent so much time. And as you know, 9 times out of 10, it always goes back to, it's got to be somebody close and somebody personal.
It's got to be simple explanation.
Yeah, yeah.
Can't be complicated.
No.
And we all try to make it complicated because we don't know anything.
And the thing is too, once again, it was somebody who understood that the entire police force was off, having a vacation party that day. And, of all the days, that was going to be the best day because, you weren't going to have so many cops walking the beat that day. So there was that sort of gap, so they had to at least be knowledgeable as far as that goes.
Yeah.
But these were wealthy people, and these were people who knew the town, and the town knew them, obviously. And so they weren't ignorant, so they would have had to put a plan together.
Yep. That's the weird thing. It's just
It was,
everything seemed to work out.
yeah, it was definitely very premeditated, I feel.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't, I don't think it seems like somebody had to get rid of all that evidence. I mean, granted, once again, if you fast forward in time, we would have caught that person easily with just some luminol
And some DNA.
and some DNA
And some fingerprints might be
right.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, we would have had that thing wrapped up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Yeah.
back then, it would be easy now in 2023 eyes to say that the police were not good at their jobs. But it's like, well,
That
who would
wasn't their
have?
job to be
Right.
good at their job.
Right. Well, and what police force back then would have figured that out?
Right. No, they caught drunks and
Yeah.
shoplifters. They didn't really do much more than that.
Nope. Nope.
No, it was just not within their training. There was no such thing as a detective.
Right.
You had to hire a Pinkerton.
Exactly.
And those guys, they have their own history. It's
They
shady
do.
history.
Yeah, that's a whole thing in and of itself. a whole sensory of fascination to itself.
Oh gosh, I think I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours and
Yeah.
hours. So thank you so much for joining us today
No,
on the
thank
Lizzie
you.
Borden podcast. This was great, and I'm sure I'll come up with something else to ask you about and have you on again, but
I'm always here.
you are always there, but
Yeah.
you're tremendous, and your insight is important, and I think it's great to share that. So I think people will be very pleased.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased with what you had to say, especially talking about Fall River the way you did. It's important because I'm not from here, so I don't
Yeah.
have any. I don't have a leg to stand on there when I talk about it. I only have a leg to stand on from my own experiences fighting City Hall.
Right.
It's not the same thing as being
It's
raised here.
it's a hard town to explain because on the outside it kind of defies logic. I've always said to people, when you look at this part of Massachusetts, Fall River is surrounded by these beautiful, well designed, well done cities that bring in so many things, and for some reason we can't figure it out.
Right.
And that's not by mistake. I think a lot of it is sort of engineered. For some reason, the powers that be want things the way they are, and I don't know why.
On that note,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rick.
All right.
Have a good day.
You too.
Ciao.
Oh.
Thank you for listening to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, episode 23. We've been talking to award-winning filmmaker and professor of media studies and screenwriting Ricardo Rebelo on all things Lizzie Borden, including the making of his PBS documentary, Lizbeth of Maplecroft, which is now available on YouTube. Find Richard Barron's Lizzie Borden Girl Detective Stories at Amazon.com and at LizzieBordenGirlDetective.com, where you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Listen to more Lizzie Borden podcasts on our website or on Podbean, Audible, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube. If you like what you're hearing, please consider supporting this podcast by subscribing to it on Patreon.com.